Hello everyone, you're very welcome along on this latest audio walk from open country with me, Tom. You join me today on what is an absolutely spectacular one. There's not a cloud in the sky, it's beautifully pale blue. The sun's beating down. I must admit I considered putting my shorts on this morning, but as there's still a bit of a nip in the air, I'll save my legs for a later episode. But still, I've left my coat at home and the sun is definitely warming things up, which is a great sign as spring and summer are very much waiting to burst forth in front of us, which, to be honest, I'm really looking forward to. Now, the purpose of this walk today is to take you to encounter one of my favourite icons of spring, and that is the beautiful bluebell. Not just one or two, but a whole wood full of them. So, without further ado, let's put our best foot forward and venture out towards a wood that I know as Weeton wood. It's also known as Rougemont Carwood, if you want its posh name. I'll probably just keep calling it Weeton wood, to be honest. And hopefully along the way we will encounter these beautiful bluebells. So let's get going. So we've started from the village of Weeton itself, which is a very small village really. There's just a row of houses and maybe a couple of farms. It may be a name that you recognise if you've ever been to Leeds from Harrogate or vice versa on the train, as you stop at Weeton station along the way. Although the station itself is technically in Hewby, which is very confusing, but there we go. On our right hand side is the very iconic spire of St Barnabas Church here in Weeton. A lot of the other churches in this area have the classic square or cuboid bell tower, whereas this has a spire that stretches quite high into the sky. And if you're ever walking along this area of Wharfdale, you will often see it for miles around because it is so distinctive. Sorry if I just muddled my words a bit there. I did fall into a bit of a ditch behind me. I'll try not to do that again. Around the church are these beautiful trees, a combination of horse chestnuts which are just coming into leaf. They're usually the first ones to come into leaf in early spring. And then I can also see a few oak trees as well, with the buds starting to come forth with the leaves, which will probably obscure the view that we've got of St Barnabas Church at the moment in a few months' time. So I'm pretty privileged to have this viewpoint at the moment. Anyway, I know you've come here for bluebells, so we'll crack on and cross a few fields, and I can just about see the tops of the trees of Weeton Wood to my left. We may have to encounter a few cows on the way, but I'm sure that'll be easily done. We're just about at the path that's going to take us over the fields towards the wood. But before we venture off this single track road that we're on at the moment, I just want to bring your attention to the beautiful hawthorn hedges that are lining it. They've been cut over the winter quite pristinely. They're almost in a sort of diamond shape. But as I've been walking down, they've just been alive with wildlife. A little sparrow has been following us along the way, and every so often you hear this rustle in the hedge or in the undergrowth underneath, whether it's going to be a mouse or a vole or just ground birds that just are hopping in and out of the hedges. It really is lovely to see and hear. Also, it's giving this road an edge of green because the hawthorn leaves are starting to pop as well. And in this beautiful sunshine, it really does feel even more warming. I hope you can hear these skylarks that are in the background. I always listen out for skylarks because, again, they're one of those signs of spring and summer coming. And it is such a beautiful sound, that shrill, warbling cry. They're quite unassuming birds to look at, really. I suppose you would call them little brown jobs, as they say in the birding world. But from such a, well, I wouldn't like to call it drab, but an unassuming bird, the sound is really elegantly beautiful. As if on cue. As I've just passed through a few stiles through these hawthorn hedges that I was speaking about earlier, it just makes you realise what good protection they are for the wildlife. As I nearly got my jumper caught on one of the thorns, I thought this audio walk may never come out because I'll just be stuck in this hedge forever, caught on the thorns. But thankfully I managed to wriggle myself free. I've just got one more stile to go, and then the trees of Weeton Wood will open out in front of us. The anticipation is growing. We've just come onto a farm track now, and we're going through the field where the cows are. The breeze has picked up a little bit here as well. I think it's a bit more exposed in this field. There aren't as many trees around and hedgerows. You may be able to hear some of the cows sneezing behind me. There are some beautiful little calves as well, which are looking all fresh and new and fluffy. One of them to my left-hand side is just starting to get some horns protruding from the top of its head as well. The adult cows are either basking in the sunshine or wafting their tails to avoid all the flies that are flitting around the area. I don't think they're a specific breed. I think you'd probably call them Heinz 57 varieties. Each cow has its own distinctive markings. The majority of the calves are all brown. They're just happily enjoying the weather and chewing the cud as good cows do. Although one or two of them seem to have a bit of hay fever as they keep sneezing a lot. Can cows get hay fever? That's something that we can look up and find out. Be a bit of a rum do, I suppose, if they did, living in fields all day. Anyway, I'm digressing. Let's go and find some bluebells. Bless you, little fella. The wood is tantalisingly close now. In fact, I can almost smell the sweetness of the bluebells in the air. Before we cross the final field, we've come across this beautiful little pack horse bridge. Just a humpback bridge with cobbles laid in it. Hello, Mr. Chaffinch. There's a chaffinch just perched itself in a little hawthorn tree to the left-hand side of the stream that we're just crossing. Beautiful, colourful birds of chaffinches, especially the males. They've got quite a rusty, brownish-red chest, a bluish-grey head with flecks of white on an otherwise dark grey and black wing. I think there's a pair just having a conversation with each other. Looking down, the water is sparkling in this sun. There's not a huge amount of water in the stream, but it's still flowing reasonably nicely. There used to be quite a few more trees around, but I noticed that the farmers cut them down at one side of the stream, so the sunlight is pouring in. It's lovely to hear that light trickling noise of the water passing over the rocks. As I look up, I can actually see the moon. It might be the middle of the afternoon and bright blue skies, but it's definitely there, the half moon, just adding to this beautiful quintessential Yorkshire countryside scene. We've made it. We've just come through the gate into Weeton Wood, and we met with this wonderful sea of blue flowers stretching out as far as the eye can see in and amongst these tall giants of trees. The majority of the trees here are beech. You can just see the beautiful soft light green leaves coming from the buds. Of course, these bluebells wouldn't be able to grow if the wood was in full leaf, because they rely on the sun coming through the gaps in the trees to give them life, which is why they always come out at this sort of early spring time of year, before all the leaves take the sunlight away from them, where they tend to get overtaken by other things on the forest floor. It is such a wonderful sight, and the atmosphere changes. As soon as you walk through the gate, you just met with this. It's not silence, because you can hear the birds, and you can hear me rabbiting on as always, but it just feels different. It feels calmer, quieter, as if life's almost slowing down. This sign in front of us now always makes me chuckle every time I come into Weeton Wood. The wood itself is owned by English Heritage. It's not only protected for natural purposes, it's also the site of an old castle, which we'll come to in a moment. It's not too impressive, it's mainly just a ditch and a bank, but it's protected by English Heritage. But the sign that is in front of us now says English Heritage Conversation Area. They've misspelt conservation, which I always think's funny. I always think we should gather together and have a good chin wag when I get to this sign. Looks like somebody's tried to Tipp-Ex it out and correct it, but the Tipp-Ex has now worn off. So there's no getting away from that little error there. I've been coming to this wood for many years actually, mainly for photography purposes. I've yet to find a better wood in Yorkshire, if not the whole of the country, which is better for photographing bluebells. Mainly because the woodland floor is quite flat, so you get that nice plane. And also the trees are quite sporadically placed, so the amount of blue that you see in any one given scene is just popping in your face. It's quite dramatic. In a lot of other woods, you'll get clumps of trees where it gets a bit busy, so you can't have that clear vantage point. Or like in Rifferwood, just across the road from where we are, which is another place which is fantastic for bluebells. Because it's on a hill, you can never get that same vantage point as you can here. And I don't suppose very many people know about this place. When I come, you maybe see one or two people in a few hours, and that's it. And I think just that peace and the fact that people don't know it's here adds to it, because you're going to get unique photographs if you're on here for a photography trip, or you're just going to see something that not very many other people see, which for me is always a privilege. I just muddled my words up there. I didn't fall in a ditch that time. One of the things that always strikes me about a bluebell wood is the smell. It's sort of like a sweet, perfumey smell. And as I said earlier on, you can almost smell it from the field outside before you get into the wood. And when you can smell it, you know it's going to be coming and you know it's going to be good. It's absolutely wonderful. Whilst I've got the opportunity, I'm just going to crouch down if I can. My knees aren't that brilliant, but here we go. And just take a closer look at these beautiful flowers. I've photographed them time after time, but you very rarely just take a moment just to look at them and see what they're all about. They are just very elegant. You can see why they call them bluebells, or else, although they're slightly lilac in colour. But they are in a very much a bell shape, with these white stamens poking out, which the bees will come to and pollinate eventually. So we get to see them every year. Some of them are more out than others. There's some that are just still a cluster of a bud, and others that are beautifully hanging in the way that they do. They sort of lean to one side or the other under the weight of the flower. The bluebells themselves hanging down towards the floor. They are really, really elegant flowers. Beautiful to see, beautiful to smell. We've now made it through to the far corner of Weeton Wood, and in front of us are the remains of Rougemont Castle, which is a ruined castle that dates back to the Anglo-Saxon period of the Middle Ages. And although it's now just a ditch and a few mounds in and amongst the trees and the bluebells, it was once quite an impressive fortified structure. It was home to the Lord of the Manor of Harewood, which sounds a very grand title, doesn't it? And as well as the residence itself, it would have held pens for livestock and horses. The site was actually abandoned around 1366 when Harewood Castle was built on the slope opposite. You can't see that at the moment because it's shrouded in the trees. But I can tell you that it is there because I have been to it. And it is equally as impressive a structure as this one probably was, although there's still a lot more left of Harewood Castle, even though even that is now a ruin. You might be thinking, wow, Tom, you're really clued up on these things, but I must admit I have cheated and read the sign that's on the footpath signpost beside me. But it is really interesting to read about and to look into. Ooh, I'm sure that squirrel is unaware that there was once a castle there. It's just merrily bounding through the trees. The diversity of wildlife in this wood never ceases to astound me. There are birds flitting around here, there and everywhere, and there's so many birds singing at one given time, it's really hard to discern the different species. I'm sure many of you out there will listen to this track back and try and identify them if you can. As we've been walking along, I've seen wrens hopping about in the bluebells and the little rotting logs here and there. A blue tit's just landed in a small tree just up the path from where we are. In fact, there's a couple of them flying around. In the past, I have seen tree creepers here. I've seen deer, a fair share of woodpeckers as well. It is amazing if you just stand in one place for a moment and just circle round and look at the surroundings. It's either a bird flitting somewhere or a noise in the undergrowth that you think, oh, what's that? I know where we were when we first came in, where the conversation area sign was. There's also a live badgers set. I've never actually seen badgers here, just evidence of them with the large holes and the scrapings of earth that they've excavated. I always tell myself every time I come down, if I had the patience, I'd come down and sit just for a bit longer to see if I could see them. Maybe one spring evening where it's nice and warm, I might just succumb to that desire and see if I can eventually see the Weeton wood badgers. There's also a bee humming behind me as well, pollinating those bluebells. There's certainly rich pickings for the insects around here as well. And again, as I look even further into the wood, there's more bees floating around, which is a lovely sight to see. Many people are quite fearful of that hum of the bumblebee or any kind of flying creature. But we can't afford to lose them, so when I hear them, it's always a welcome sound. Reluctantly, I've had to leave the wood behind now as we start our walk back towards Weeton village. We've come out into open fields. At the minute there's not much growing. It looks like the remains of last year's crops haven't yet been ploughed into the ground, ready for some kind of regeneration this year. So we're just faced by this line of grass which forms the path that we're walking on in between two very brown, barren looking fields. But this position where we are forms a wonderful vantage point. Although it's clear skies, it is quite hazy today, but you can still see quite far into the distance. Just in front of us is the very distinctive shape of Armscliff Crag, the rocky outcrop that towers above the Wharf Valley. Just at the other end of the valley, at the head of the valley, you can see the ridge of Otley Shevin and the woodland that encrusts it. And then, of course, in the middle of the view is that distinctive spire of St Barnabas Church that we started off from. As a red kite circles overhead, circling and rising on the thermals. Beautiful sight. We've come to, well, nearly to the road on which we started from. There's a little skylark just hopping about the stream next to me. I'm sure it'll get back into the air and start singing again in a moment. And on the right is this wonderful garden. Every time I do this walk, I always poke my nose and eyes over the hedge because it's a really, really lovely garden. It's a nice balance between a cottage wildlife garden as well as beautiful pristine colours. I'm sure later on in the summer it'll look even better. There's also quite a sizable pond. In fact, you could probably almost call it a lake because it's got a rubber dinghy on it. I've just dug a pond in my back garden. It's not quite big enough to have a dinghy on it, but if it looks as half as good as this one in a few years' time, then I know I'll be doing well. Anyway, I suppose we ought to head back to the road and back towards Weeton and the culmination of this audio walk today. Well, here we are, back in Weeton. Popular with cyclists, that's what you just heard going past there. And what a beautiful day it is to be out cycling. I am starting to wonder whether I should have launched in with the shorts today. It is definitely warm enough, I would have thought. Anyway, I might go home and put them on just to say that I've broken them in for the first time this year. I suppose this is the end of today's audio walk. I do hope you've enjoyed it. I know we've packed in quite a bit there, from St Barnabas Church to the wonderful hedgerows to, of course, those spectacular bluebells in Weeton Wood. So until next time, thank you very much for listening. I look forward to audio walking with you again in the not too distant future.